Imagine arriving in Melbourne for the first time and looking at a map of the train network. At first glance, it seems pretty impressive. There are rail lines stretching in almost every direction, connecting suburbs across one of Australia's largest cities. But if you look a little closer, you'll notice something. Almost everything points towards the CBD. For over a century, Melbourne's rail network has been built like the spokes of a wheel, with the city centre sitting right in the middle. That design worked well when most people travelled between the suburbs and the city, but Melbourne has changed a lot. Today, millions of people travel between suburbs, universities, hospitals, airports, and major employment centres that aren't necessarily located in the CBD, and that's creating new challenges for a rail network that was designed for a different era. To solve these problems, Melbourne is undergoing one of the biggest railway transformations in its history. From the metro tunnel to airport rail and the suburban rail loop, billions of dollars are being invested to reshape how the city moves. So, what exactly is changing? And will these projects be enough to prepare Melbourne for the future? First, we're going to look at the problem with Melbourne's rail network. To understand why these projects are happening, we first need to understand the problem they're trying to solve. Melbourne's railway network is huge, but despite its size, many lines rely on the same tracks through the city centre. For decades, the City Loop helped increase capacity by allowing more trains to enter the CBD. However, as Melbourne's population continued growing, even that system began reaching its limits. There were only so many trains that could fit through the network's busiest sections. As more passengers crowded onto trains each year, it just becomes clear that Melbourne needed additional capacity. It doesn't just need more trains, it needs an entirely new way of moving trains through the city. Okay, the first project, which has just opened, is the Metro Tunnel. So, where the Metro Tunnel comes in, the Metro Tunnel is one of the most significant transport projects ever undertaken in Victoria. At its core, the project is relatively simple: build a second rail corridor underneath central Melbourne. But the impact is huge. Instead of relying solely on the city loop, trains from Melbourne's growing western and southeastern suburbs can now travel through a brand new underground route beneath the city. 5 new underground stations were constructed as part of the project. These include stations at Arden, Parkville, State Library, Town Hall, and Anzac. What's particularly important is where those stations are located. Parkville, for example, serves one of Australia's largest education and medical precincts. Before the Metro Tunnel, this area had no train station despite attracting tens of thousands of people every day. The project isn't simply about creating new stations, it's about creating capacity. By separating different train lines and reducing bottlenecks, more trains can operate across the network. For passengers, that means more frequent services and a more reliable railway. In many ways, the Metro Tunnel is doing for Melbourne what the City Loop did decades ago. It's preparing the network for another generation of growth. The airport rail is the next project. While the Metro Tunnel focuses on capacity, the airport rail focuses on connectivity. For years, Melbourne has stood out among major international cities for one surprising reason. It never had a rail connection to its main airport. This city has a population of 5 million. Passengers travelling to Melbourne Airport have traditionally relied on cars, taxis, rideshare services, or buses. As the airport continued growing, this became increasingly problematic. Road congestion around the airport, worsened. The calls for rail connection grew louder. The idea of airport rail has existed for decades, yet despite countless proposals, studies, announcements, construction repeatedly failed to begin. Funding disagreements, planning challenges, and political debates all contributed to delays. Now, however, work is finally progressing. The current plans involve creating a rail connection between Melbourne Airport and the wider metropolitan network through Sunshine. This is important because Sunshine is expected to become one of Melbourne's most significant transport hubs. Passengers travelling from the regional Victoria, Western Melbourne, and eventually the airport will all connect through this area. Airport rail isn't just about helping tourists. It's about integrating one of Australia's busiest airports into the broader public transport system. And as Melbourne continues to grow, that connection will become increasingly important. Now, the last project is the suburban rail loop. If the Metro Tunnel solves today's problem, the suburban rail loop is attempting to solve tomorrow's. And it might be the most ambitious project Melbourne has ever proposed. For over a century, Melbourne's rail network has focused on moving people into and out of the CBD. But modern cities don't work like that anymore. Many people travel between suburbs. Students commute to universities. Workers travel to employment centres outside the city centre. Yet in Melbourne, these journeys can often be surprisingly difficult by public transport. The suburban rail loop aims to change that. Instead of building another line into the CBD, it creates an entirely new orbital railway connecting major suburban centres. The first stage will link locations such as Cheltenham, Monash, Glen Waverley, and Box Hill. These destinations are already important centres of education, employment, and housing. The goal is to allow people to travel between them without first passing through central Melbourne. It's a fundamentally different way of thinking about public transport. Rather than reinforcing the traditional city centre focused network, it creates new connections between suburbs. Supporters argue that it will reshape how Melbourne grows. Critics argue that this becomes a massive price tag. Either way, the project has become one of the most significant transport debates in Australia. What's interesting is that these projects are all solving different problems. The Metro Tunnel increases capacity, Airport Rail improves connectivity, the suburban rail loop changes the structure of the network itself. Together, they represent a shift in how Melbourne approaches transport planning. For decades, rail expansion largely involved extending lines further into new suburbs. Today, the focus is different. The challenge isn't simply reaching more places, it's making the entire network work better, and that's becoming increasingly important. Melbourne is expected to continue to grow for decades to come. More people will need access to job, education, and services. Without major investment, existing infrastructure will struggle to cope. Whether every project succeeds exactly as planned remains to be seen. Large infrastructure projects always face challenges, but one thing is clear. The Melbourne rail network of the future will look very different from the network that exists today. And the changes happening right now will shape how millions of people move around the city for generations to come. So while trains passing through Melbourne stations may look familiar today, the railway beneath them is being transformed, and we're only just beginning to see the results.